Welcome to this very, very wonderful guest we have tonight. Unfortunately, I think due to the rain, a lot of people signed up, decided to stay in. It's the beginning of the winter. But we are very happy, I'm very happy that we managed to get Yishai Sarid here to Vienna. So first of all, welcome Yishai Sarid.
Thank you.
Because when we started talking about you coming here, it wasn't clear if there would be planes flying properly from Tel Aviv to Vienna or to anywhere in Middle Europe because of the war in Gaza, because of other wars that happened in the meantime with Iran and all these kind of things. Also, 2 years ago, when I interviewed Yishai about a book that came out 2 years ago, Schwachstellen in German. It was just before October 7th. So the last years, it has been really not an easy way to invite an author who lives in an area which is so torn with conflict and war and tragedy. So I'm very happy that we made it possible today. Yishai Sarid is an author who is selling his novels as bestsellers just in general in Israel, but also in German translation. And that although you trained as a lawyer and not as an author in the first place, and but from the 12 novels, is it 12?
No, it's the 8th.
8th novel now. Quite a few have been translated in many languages, but also into German. One of those that I thought really had an impact on me personally was the one that was published 2 years ago, Schwachstellen, because it dealt with the surveillance industry in Israel. Something that is also quite close to your own biography, because you served in the army in an intelligence unit, which of course was the foundation of a whole military industry, which made Israel actually also stronger economically due to the fact that it's involved in a conflict which produces, new weapons and new industries. Before Schwachstellen, you published a book called Monster, which again was dealing with a very, very topical issue for the Israeli society, because it deals, among other subjects, with the question how the Holocaust and the memory of the Holocaust, of the Shoah, is being, till today, used, also instrumentalized in the Israeli society to line people up against a feeling of the need to defend, the need to also to stand together against an enemy, which sometimes becomes counterproductive. But this book, which comes out now, is called Chamäleon. We have it here. We have it also outside. If you want to buy one, I'm sure Yishai will be happy to sign it. And this is, again, a book which tells a story that is not only relevant for Israel, but also, I think, for all of our societies. It's about the rise of right-wing populism, not only in politics, but also in our professions as authors or as journalists, where right-wing populism and the polarization and the ones who screams loudest wins is one of the topics that we all have to deal with, because if you try to explain politics or complex problems in a way that is not fast enough for a generation that has a very short attention span, it often gets lost. And so your hero in this book is a journalist who sells basically his soul to a right-wing private channel in order also to overcome his midlife crisis, but also to, get through with a message to anyone. So we want to talk about this book, but we also want to talk about the situation now in Israel and how it is as an Israeli author to live today in Israel, but also outside. And when we met last, it was 5 years ago, 5 weeks ago, sitting in Tel Aviv on a sunny afternoon on Rehov Dizengoff. And it was 2 days after the Trump show in the Knesset. The hostage deal had been done. The hostages, the Israeli hostages were home. The ceasefire was in effect. And I asked you at the time how you felt, and you said you feel the relief physically. And I wonder how you feel now, 5 weeks after.
It's good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Tessa, for inviting me. Every day there is not a full-scale war is a good day. The last 2 years were terrible, starting from October 7th, the attack of Hamas, the massacre of Israeli civilians and soldiers, many atrocities that happened in this day and in the following days, a huge shock for everybody. And then the 2 years that followed, terrible war, that began as a classic war of self-defense and developed to be a war of revenge, of destruction for destruction's sake. As I told you 5 weeks ago, I never thought that I will reach to such a point. But I'm very much thankful for President Trump. Probably if I was an American, you know, I wouldn't support him in any way, the opposite. But without Trump, it will not end. I think without Trump, we would go to an even worse situation with this very extreme and dangerous government we have. And Trump, from his interests, you know, which are not so important for this, in this context, stopped it for the time being. Now, of course, it's very fragile.
Well, we can see that already.
It is. There's no quiet. There's everyday incidents, but it's not the same war. We don't see the everyday horror pictures of both civilians killed in Gaza Strip and Israeli soldiers being killed for nothing also there, so it's much, much better. But it's a very hard time to live in Israel, especially when you are very much involved in what's happening, and when you care about your country. It comes from a point where I care very much for Israel. Israel is important for me. So that is the situation right now.
But we were wondering 5 weeks ago if the demonstrations, the protests would continue, because the protests actually started before the hostage situation came about, and it was protests against the judicial reform that Netanyahu's government had started, undermining sort of the courts, undermining all sorts of things which people didn't appreciate. So did these protests continue? Are you still speaking? You went practically every Saturday night in the last years.
Yeah, I'm going everywhere, wherever people. I also go stand in the audience in Tel Aviv, but I also speak a lot in public events all over the country. I've just been, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, somewhere in the Galilee, in which 50 people stand in on the road. Kfar Tavor, a very nice village in the middle of the Galilee, and they invited me, and I stood there with this megaphone, which is not my natural, you know, thing to do. And I shouted, you know, and the cars went through all directions and beeped, and some of the drivers cursed, etc., and talked about things. So I participate as much as people want to hear me.
But they are smaller now, at the moment?
Well, it is smaller because the main people, first of all, are tired. And many of them are despaired. And what is happening that the Israeli democracy, which was not a natural thing, think of it. Israel was established in 1948 after the Holocaust. People who had no democratic tradition, or you know, there was no Jewish sovereignty for thousands of years. So it wasn't the most natural way to establish a democracy. And still, in the middle of the terrible independence war, when Israel was very small and very weak and very poor, and still haunted and traumatized by the events of the Holocaust, establish a democracy with free speech, with independent judiciary, with free elections, with parties that can participate freely in the elections, and many other things. Not that everything was perfect, you know, there were problems, but it was a democracy, a real democracy, developing in Israel. And we thought it will last forever, because this is also our advantage over our enemies. They looked at us with envy. Look at this little state with all its wars and problems, etc., but still able to maintain very much a very vivid and living democracy, which of course enables creativity and freedom of speech and art and science and scientific developments, etc., which usually autocracies or dictatorships don't have. And due to demographic and social and religious and other reasons, what we're seeing in the last, I don't know, maybe decade and much more in the last 3 years since this government came to power, is that they are trying very hard to destroy Israel's democracy.
But how big is the danger now? Because, you know, as long as the war went on, nobody could really do anything about anything because everyone was busy with the war. Is it now, can you feel that the government is now trying to introduce laws to get through the Knesset?
It's not only laws, it's a combination of laws, new laws advanced by the government, by the coalition, to limit the authority of the courts, to limit the freedom of press. But it's not only that, it's much more dangerous and severe than this because it's combined with efforts on the ground, on real life, to intimidate, to haunt, to oppress, to frighten journalists. And we have quite a lot of examples of it, really on those days, to frighten the judiciary, to delegitimize opposition leaders, both from Arab parties and also others, and all the classics of turning a democracy into autocracy or worse. It's all happening nowadays.
I mean, there was this really shocking case of this lawyer who represented the Palestinian prisoners who were tortured by Israeli soldiers, Ifat Toma Yerushalmi, who was arrested at the beginning of November not because she was representing Palestinian prisoners, but because she leaked a video to the media and admitted to it that showed this case.
That's more complicated. I mean, Ifat Toma, she's not just a lawyer. She's the chief legal counselor to the chief of staff. She's a general. A female general, and she's the chief lawyer for the army. Now, she is to be blamed, or at least with others, or responsible for many, many breaches of military, of international law, and many atrocities being done by Israel during the war, not limiting it, not avoiding it, not criticizing it, not taking steps to bring to justice soldiers and commanders that did those things. She did nothing about it. She's not a saint. But the one thing she did, she indicted, that's her authority, a few soldiers who were guards at a prison, special prison for prisoners from Gaza, which allegedly, and there is evidence for it, tortured Palestinian prisoner brought from Gaza, including sodomizing him with some tool, and terrible, terrible thing. And she was immediately blamed by the politicians, and it's much wider than politicians, by the right wing, and there are many supporters of being anti-Israeli, being against the soldiers, etc., etc. And she made the huge mistake. Instead of producing and presenting the evidence, because there are videos that show those crimes being committed, she leaked it to a TV journalist. And then when it was brought it was brought out, and there were also complaints against this leakage of the information. She lied. And she said, okay, we are investigating. Who leaked it? She herself did it. Yeah. She knew. Now, so this is, and it became a tragedy, because since then she tried twice to commit suicide after being arrested. So it's a huge personal, and she's haunted by the many right-wing supporters that treat her as, although being a general, and although generally not doing anything to prevent atrocities being made in Gaza during the war, and not doing anything.
But even if she was lying, which she shouldn't have done, even if she didn't start earlier to reveal these torture methods, but she basically had tried, as far as I understood that, for a while to get the attention of the sort of, so that the soldiers would be persecuted. So it was more an act of despair to leak it to the media, like a whistleblowing act.
But she's a general, I mean, and she lied to court. She lied to the Supreme Court. She gave a false affidavit to the Supreme Court, something you should not do. I mean, there's no...
Well, but also for that, there might be punishment, but she was arrested for leaking the video. And that smacks a little bit of a Trump method or a Putin method.
Of course, it's an absurd, because it was just published nowadays that I believe at least 98 Palestinian prisoners died in Israeli prisons since the war, which is a terrible thing. A state is not supposed to handle its prisoners, even if they are terrorists, even if they are, the worst killers. You should bring them to justice. You should not killed them without any legal process, etc. And nobody was blamed for it, nobody was arrested, there was no investigation, and nothing. So for this leak, they are treating her like she's the worst war criminal. Now, don't misunderstand me. I mean, as I told before, the war started, it was perfectly legitimate and justified because no nation in the world will allow such an attack like happened in October 7th without a proper military reply. But what happened afterwards, it's a different thing. And in many ways, it changed Israel fundamentally.
How?
It changed Israel because it broke all limits. Things that were not bearable or legitimate before, some norms.
For example, what?
For example, that you don't kill a lot of unnecessary civilians without a cause. I mean, it happened before, of course, that happens in wars, but not in numbers and in procedures that happened in this war. I mean, you don't kill 100 civilians in order to kill one terrorist, even if he's the most, bloodthirsty and terrible terrorist, but you don't do it. And that's what happened in this war.
Well, I mean, at the beginning, I think most of the world supported Israel in the defense after October 7th, and it changed. But do you think that the government had directly after October 7th exactly this plan developed, ready to destroy Gaza completely, or was this something?
With Netanyahu, you can never know. But his main aim or ambition is to stay in power. Classic authoritarian ruler to stay in power with all the benefits and all the honors, and he has this crazy family that has no life. Think about it. He's many, many years in power now. And sometimes I ask myself, why do you hold to power so much? I mean, you can give lectures in America for a lot of money and be a board member in all kind of, but he has no life outside this office.
He also doesn't want to be put in front of a court in Israel.
In Israel, there is a trial, which is a parody or a comedy.
So as long as he's in the prime minister, like he said a few weeks ago, sorry, I have a cold, and then he doesn't have to.
Yeah, it's not only this. So I don't know, but what I know for sure is that there are very strong forces and influential forces in Israel, which are the extreme right, the settlers movement, which their aim is, of course, there are all kinds, they are not from the same exactly, but their aim is to change Israel to something different. And they have an ambition, and I wrote a book about it, which was not translated yet to German, called The Third Temple, to rebuild the Third Temple in Jerusalem on the ruins of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. All of this seems like, crazy thing.
What year did you write it?
I wrote it, it was published in Israel in 2015, 10 years ago. And then it was considered almost like science fiction or something. Nowadays, people tell me, okay, we understood, you were right, but please cancel the plan. So I have to tell them I'm not the master of the plan.
It would be good if you would be.
And they saw an opportunity arising during the Gaza war to fulfill their fantasies of getting rid of the Palestinians one way or the other. And they still want to do it. And that's the poison which is ruining Israel's soul. It's real poison. It's poison of nationalism, fascism, disregard for human lives, extreme crazy religious beliefs that become reality. It's kind of mutation of Judaism. And it's everything that Israel had not been in the past. It's not rational, it's not humanistic, it's not that everything, of course, there were many, many wrong things. The occupation of the West Bank started in 1967. It didn't start yesterday. But still, there were some limits.
I mean, there were certainly limits within the society, and also not everyone, not every soldier is the same, not every general is the same in any case from their outlook. But I always had the feeling the debate about Zionism in Israel was more or less in our international living rooms also kept to 1967, and to say like this occupation that happened in 1967 should stop so that these occupied territories could be the foundation of the Palestinian state. That was sort of the deal. Now, because of this war, because of this total destruction of Gaza, people have started to discuss 1948 and sort of the root causes for this development within the Zionist movement, which now got the face of Itamar Ben-Gvir. So the question: do you see this change in the debate, so that suddenly it's not anymore about some kind of conduct of Israel or some kind of occupation, but about the principle?
Yeah, that's from a Zionist point of view. I'm a Zionist. I'm a Zionist because my grandparents came, it was then Palestine, there was no, they came in order to build a new life and future and homeland for the Jewish people, because they didn't see any future in the diaspora. It was before the Holocaust. And of course, after the Holocaust, it got additional weight, of course, and so for me, the existence of Israel is completely justified, and the Jewish people is entitled to his self-determination and to his state as any other people in the world. And of course, we have our roots in Israel, and Jewish people prayed and longed and wanted to return to Israel all over the years, and there was always a big, small or bigger, but there was always a Jewish existence and living in this land. But the criminal thing this government did is that because their so-called patriotism, they're bringing, exactly as you said, the argument is no more whether to withdraw from the 1967 territories or not. It's about the argument which is going on in the world now is whether Israel is legitimate or not. Now, we sit here in Kreisky's, Chancellor Kreisky's home, I understand. I remember his name from childhood. My late father and even my mother, whom I talked with a few days ago before I came here, told me, of course, we met Chancellor Kreisky, I believe.
What did she say? Did she?
I don't know. She didn't, the main character in it was my father. She was probably just meeting briefly, but my father had, as a left-wing leader in Israeli politics, for many years he knew Kreisky. And Kreisky was not a popular figure in Israel because he was considerate of Palestinian rights and tried to be a negotiator, etc. And he was close even to the PLO, etc. But I think that Kreisky, not for a second, doubted the right of Israel to exist. Absolutely. That was not the case. And what we are seeing now, that especially with young people, and not only young people around the world, Israel became like Satan for them, like the worst thing in the world. And that is because those people.
Yeah, but that's what I was wondering, if you think if it's the danger for Israel's existence is actually coming more from the outside or from the inside?
The danger is, first of all, from the inside. Because militarily, I know I'm not sure it's forever because there are historical processes, and as long as we get weaker in the inside, we also get weaker militarily, etc., economically, etc., etc. But the worst thing is what's happening to Israel in the inside. Instead of a liberal, mainly secular, pragmatic, advanced country, it's becoming more and more religious, more and more violent, more and more militaristic, etc., etc., closing within itself, haunting the people who help her most, scientists. For example, I'll give you from this book talks about, I call it in the book, the Patriotic Channel, which is actually Channel 14, in Israeli television, which is quite popular, and it is the most enthusiastic supporter of Netanyahu and of the right, and of this government, which would be okay if it was also a real press, but it's not a real journalism, because they would justify whatever Netanyahu does, no matter what, and they can reverse their views, etc., etc. And when the Iranian rockets, missiles, fell on Israel on June this year, one of them hit the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, which is the most important scientific establishment in Israel, in all areas of science, physics, biology, chemistry, etc., etc. Named after the first president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, which was a great scientist. And they were glad about it.
Because they want to
damage. Because the people of the Weizmann Institute are considered to be what they call the Kaplanists, the people who
demonstrate
against the government in Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv. So they were, it was kind of, okay, now you see, it hits you. Yeah.
But it is something that of course happens not only in Israel. The fact that there are private TV channels that are trying to pull the public to the right. We just have this same thing happening in England, the BBC, the latest scandals where people are trying to delegitimize the public broadcasters who are balanced and have to try to get everyone, represented, and establish right-wing channels to represent the populist loudest vote. And so you see this in your book. You write about this, how it works, how it also gets stronger, because of course hatred sells much better. We know this from the unsocial media. We know it online. The more aggressive you are talking, people might cheer you. The more balanced you are, the less followers you get, because people get bored with you being balanced. So
that's what happens to this Shai Tamus.
And that's what happens to him. So when you wrote about this, was this also an attempt to have a general topic that is of an interest not only for the Israeli political situation, but also something that connects actually Israel to all other
I
countries?
always start with the human story. And first of all, it's a story about a person who is 50-something, used to be quite a successful journalist in print during the 1990s when he was young. And he also appeared in television from time to time. But then, as what happened to the printed press is being forgotten, is sent to his columns are, instead of being on the front page, is drawn back to the inner pages, and he's sent to write theater reviews that nobody reads and nobody cares about, and he doesn't appear in television anymore, and he's kind of forgotten, and they're cutting his salary time after time again, and his wife doesn't love him anymore, And this kind, and the
kids don't speak to him anymore because
the kids, yes, and he has his life are lousy, and he tries to reinvent himself through social media, and he got 20 likes. And he sees that all around him, people succeed. You know, the younger generation. It's also an issue of age and changing world.
Don't say that. I'm 57.
I'm 60, Tessa. Okay, you are, you know.
We are young, Yishai.
No, but it is, and he tries to catch attention. And of course, I understand him. Like all of us, he tries to catch attention, like he used to have, and he likes those bright lights of the studios, which I hate, by the way. When I have to go to a TV studio, it's a nightmare for me. Sometimes I have to do it to promote my books in Israel, but you know, I really dislike it. But for him, it's a dream. Being in the studio, it's his greatest desire. So when he gets, and he used to be famous for his moderate, balanced columns in the newspapers, presenting different point of views. There are no customers for it now. Nobody wants to read the balanced views. I don't know, maybe in The Economist or something. But
yeah, I think so. I mean, but when you know that you need this kind of media that is a bit more balanced, is usually in emergencies. So if you want to know if there's COVID or not, and what the rules are, so people turn to the public broadcast, to ORF or Khan.
That's not what happened, for example, in Israel during the war. During war, immediately, all the journalists, they're all cowards. I don't blame them, but they're cowards. Nobody will speak against the army. Everything the government did was justified. Every attack, every crazy military initiative was the most innovative and genius.
Now, don't be unfair to some of the independent media.
Where, in Israel?
Yeah, Haaretz and...
okay, Haaretz. But Haaretz, you know what? Haaretz holds about 5% of the readers in print, which are also very, you know, my daughters, which are in the 20s, they don't read in papers anymore. So for the 5% leftist of Israel, but if you see mainstream channels, you know how long it took for those channels to show the disaster in Gaza on the Palestinian side? Almost 2 years. Until nowadays, they don't show what they're showing all over the world. Because they're afraid to be seen as defeatists, as traitors, as pro-Palestinians, etc., etc.
But is it now? I mean, your book also goes, we don't want to tell too much maybe of it, because I think it's really important to keep a little bit also the tension, what actually happens. But it comes very close to today, and October 7th plays a role. And, you know, this idea that the Israeli public didn't want to know, because it was so traumatizing also what happened on October 7th. Is it different now? I mean, do you have the feeling people now that this active war has more or less stopped now? Do people now want to know if Gaza is being rebuilt, if the Palestinian population gets something to eat, if people can
very few leftists, which have no influence, almost none of it. And they include the opposition. The opposition doesn't talk about it and doesn't care about it, and afraid to speak about it. And what's happening, the tragedy is that vast majority, almost maybe 95, maybe 98, maybe 99% of Israelis don't believe there is hope for any peace settlement with the Palestinians anymore. And that didn't start today. It started 30 years ago with the collapse of the Oslo Accords, where on the one side, Israeli terrorists did their best to sabotage the protests, and of course, its peak was the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by a Jewish assassin. But on the other side, and that was very, very significant and terrible and horrible, the terrorist attacks by the Palestinians. In the very days that Israel for the first time recognized the PLO and recognized Palestinians' right for some sovereignty, etc., at the same time, they started to blow buses and nightclubs and restaurants, etc., all over the country. I once counted that around my home in Tel Aviv, there were about almost 20 attacks, deadly attacks of Palestinians during the last 30 years. So what happened that also moderate Israelis, who are not extremists, they're not settlers, and not nothing like this, say, we don't care about the Palestinians. And of course, it reached its peak in October 7. And something was broken. But something very deep was broken, and also which explains the campaign of revenge that started afterwards.
But this type of revenge campaign was not supported by a majority of the Israelis at a certain point. Maybe there is no majority for a Palestinian state. And maybe even on the left, Israeli politicians are very careful what they are actually promoting, because it's not supported in the Israeli population. But this total destruction or the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, which was sort of in the room for a while, do you think that's supported by the majority of Israelis?
Yeah, I want to be honest with you.
So if they would have expelled them, people would not have protested?
That was my worst nightmare, that it will go on and will conquer Gaza. And then there is a question, what are you doing with a population of 2 million people? And who would they oppose it? And would soldiers disobey orders they get? And the answers I answered to myself were were terrible. I was not sure where could it lead. So that's unfortunately, or I don't know, it's unfortunately, but that's what my books are based on. Because I lived 60 years in Israel, I was born in Israel, was raised up, I served in the military, I feel completely part of the Israeli people for good or worse. I'm not going anywhere, I didn't emigrate, I didn't run away, etc., etc. So I know Israel's soul and psychology very, very well. And it went for a very, very bad place. Because October 7th hit the most sensitive nerve in Israel's soul, which is never be helpless again, and never see your children and women and civilians being slaughtered and tortured again. And that happened.
I mean, I thought that became very obvious on October 7th and in the days after, that this re-traumatization of the society, but also of Jewish populations outside, of course, it was very understandable that this triggered something which is absolutely terrifying, and also would not necessarily lead to any kind of anything good, because people don't become more liberal in their political decisions when they are traumatized and terrified. But if it is like this, then there is also not a lot of hope for new elections removing this far-right political group from power?
You can turn it one way or another. It's almost 50-50. It's not 50-50. There's a huge majority for the right. The champion of the opposition now is Naftali Bennett, who is a classic right-wing leader. He's for the settlements. is not for Palestinian state. He is not at all a leftist, very far from it, but he's much, also in my mind, much better than Netanyahu, because at least he will bring back some kind of normality, or is moderate, not in politically, but in his he will not use hatred within Israelis as a political tool, etc., etc.
But would he make a coalition with whatever their names then will be when they regroup also the far right, sort of Smotrich or Ben-Gvir?
I don't think so, but there is a big issue of whether he'll make a coalition with the Arab parties, which is kind of a consensus among Israeli opposition parties. We will not include them, which is a terrible thing. There are 20% of Israel's, and by the way, they will not have a government without the Arab parties. So they are kind of hallucinating. But while saying all those pessimist and bad things, I always remember the evening of 1977 when President Anwar Sadat of Egypt, which was the worst enemy of Israel, the most powerful enemy of Israel, just 4 years after the terrible 1973 Yom Kippur War. This evening of 1977, I was then 12 years old. There was still just black and white television in Israel. And everybody sat and saw President Sadat going down from his plane on Ben Gurion Airport in Israel, smiling.
Shocking.
And accepting us. I really recognize you. I recognize your life here and your state. And on the same minute he got back, it took some additional 2 years for negotiation, but on the same moment he got back the whole Sinai Peninsula that was conquered in 1967. Because huge majority of Israel is not interested in the settlements and still not interested in the third temple. These are margins, very prominent, very influential, but mostly Middle Israel is not interested in it. So there comes a point when Israelis will believe that we can live in some kind of cold or any kind of peace with Palestinians, most Israelis will accept it. Like they accepted it, by the way, during the Oslo Accords.
Yes.
There was a majority for it, but then it blew up in explosions.
So did the Palestinians. The problem is always you need only a few terrorist attacks on one or the other side, and
yeah, but it's deeper than this, because the narratives, the Palestinian narrative, why didn't Yasser Arafat accept the proposals he got from Prime Minister Ehud Barak in Camp David convention in 2000, October 2000. There is the right of return. What are you doing with Jaffa and Haifa and Lod and other places which are within the 1948 borders of Israel? What are you saying to your people? What are you doing with the dream of returning to those places? That's a big deal.
Yeah, but so it was at the time, it seemed already impossible to solve it. Nowadays, of course, we're thinking it's even more impossible to solve it, because, there were all these solutions were on the table. With the right of return, it would be with compensation, with a theoretical right of return, and a certain number of real returnees, and all this. And I mean, nowadays, there is not, in the West Bank, nowadays almost no place anymore for a Palestinian state that could be a basis for self-determination.
If there will be a goodwill, you can find all kinds of solutions, symbolic solutions, because there is the issue of symbols.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's a civil war. these are two peoples living in a very small territory. The distance between Tel Aviv and Gaza Strip by car, without the traffic jams, it's less than an hour drive. It's the same seashore, it's the same geography.
The same beach, basically. Yeah.
And let me tell you something else. Also, the people are not so different from each other, with their habits, with their foods, with the music they listen to. And as years go by, they become more similar to each other, but hate each other more and more. So really, that's the
tragedy. But, you know, if you think that your father, when he was this famous left-wing firebrand politician, and he sort of fought for many years in Shalom Achshav, in the peace movement, in Meretz, in other parties, also served as a minister in governments, and he was always representing a minority. But he could play a role. So I'm wondering if you feel that nothing has changed. There's still only like 5% maybe that would vote for.
It was much bigger. You know, the Zionism in Israel was led in the first decades by the labor movement, which was not leftist. Maybe, you know what, in nowadays terms, it was completely leftist.
For certain things, like union rights, workers' rights, I mean, it was
and also
leftist.
Living with the Palestinians. I mean, there was, of course, the Nakba and the tragedy of the Nakba, and of course, but there was no ideology of Jewish superiority.
Well, you say that, but of course, it was also not very much at the forefront of many of the politicians in Ma'arach or in,
there was not an issue of what's going on nowadays every day and night in the West Bank of robbing innocent Palestinian farmers and shepherds of their herds and beating them and sometimes killing them and injuring them and burning their houses. That was not, that was not the issue. The issue was for us building us a home. It was nowadays where you are dealing with ideology that is very close to the Ku Klux Klan and, neo-Nazis, etc. I'm very sorry to say it.
I mean,
so it's different. Now, talking about my father, there is the saying that no person is beyond replacement. Everybody can be replaced. When it comes to opposition, Israeli opposition, you don't have a figure like my father anymore, because my father, first of all, like you said, woke up every morning, and as a child you see it. You cannot fool a child. You see it in your parents' behavior, not in what he's saying. And he woke up every morning in order to save the world, and if not the world, so to save Israel. And he was not driven just by pragmatic or political aspirations, but mainly by moral. He saw himself as some kind. He didn't. I say it. He didn't say it some kind of a prophet. And nobody likes prophets, by the way. Nobody liked the biblical prophets, because all the time they lectured and they scolded and they said to the people, you are doing bad things. Everybody prefers kings and royals and all the majesty than the miserable prophets. But he was kind of a prophet, and he was very courageous. What you see now in Israel opposition, they're all cowards. They're looking at the polls and see what they think. And in such a way they will not succeed, because Netanyahu is much better in being a populist.
In that game, of course. But for you as an author, it must be very difficult. I mean, you feel for Israel, but at the same time, of course, now Israel is getting a really bad reputation in the world, so with the partners, with the allies. So how do you feel about, do you feel that you get boycotted or censored now?
Practically, Israeli artists are boycotted now in the world.
Except not here.
Except here in Germany for obvious and tragic reasons, but we are not translated as we used to be. We're not invited to festivals. Also because you know, people don't want troubles with security and etc. So, you know, and we are becoming like South Africa used to be.
But, you know, people always use the example of South Africa because to a certain extent the sanctions were successful. But it hit everyone, and it hit also authors. Yeah. So is it something that you think should be done? Should people boycott institutions, academic institutions?
You should hurt the criminals who are doing the bad things in Israeli government with the most severe sanctions. But if you are boycotting or hurting the only voices in Israel that speak about some kind of reconciliation or moral issues, you achieve exactly the opposite. And Israel will just become more and more extreme. It will not surrender. That will not be the case. And Israel is a nuclear state, and it's a different story than South Africa.
Well, it's also more, you know, really the economy and everything is very successful.
What I hope very much that Trump will go on with his efforts, because Netanyahu became like the puppet of Trump. The whole kind of, you know, Trump is working for him now to stop his trial, Netanyahu's trial, and all kind of.
Well, Trump already asked Yitzhak Herzog to pardon the prime minister, and said in the Knesset, cigars and champagne were his only crime. And that, of course, I mean, that's the man you want to trust with the Middle East process.
Trump stopped, and I was in a rally in the Tel Aviv Museum's square, which became the hostages square, the kidnapped people square since the war. In the evening, just after the deal was declared, and Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff, very shrewd businessmen who are dealing with billions with the Gulf states, not, you know, the classic, they're not poets and not writers, they're businessmen. But they spoke in this rally with a lot of compassion, not only about the Israeli hostages, but also about the Palestinian issue, and mentioned for the first time for many years in such a rally in Israel, the word peace. And that moved me, you know. Sometimes history has its own strange ways to behave. And sometimes, you know, we treat somebody like he's something and you get a different result. And Trump treats, you know, when in the time of the Roman Empire, part of this period, Judea, which is now Israel, was...
it's not part necessarily of Israel. Parts of it is the West Bank.
Okay.
And occupied territory.
The land of Israel, of Palestine, or whatever you want to call it, never mind. It's the same. Listen, it's the same land. For us, it's the land of Israel. For them, it's Palestine. It doesn't matter. It's the same land.
No, we just have to be clear how we divide it.
No, okay, but you know, the narrative will exist. It connects to the Bible and connects to Quran and connects to Salah ad-Din and connects to whatever.
Of course.
And there were the Roman emperors, and there were those local little kings like the ancestors of Herod, etc., which were under the Roman Empire, and you know they allowed them to play a little bit, and so it becomes the same. And I'm not sure it's too bad.
But if you think that Trump, I was on the square when Jared Kushner said that not all Palestinians have chosen, you know, to support Hamas or anything like this or be in this situation. So it was quite astonishing that he said that. It was a good moment. But on the other hand, the way they are dealing with these negotiations now. I mean, and also Kushner and Witkoff sat down with the Hamas leadership in order to get the deal done. So, of course, they negotiate also with them. So it would be good also if they talk about this openly a lot, because then people would understand that this is a, you know, if it's business or politics, you have to speak to your enemy in order to make a deal. But what concerns me is that at the time when Ariel Sharon took the settlements out of Israel in 2005-06, it was a unilateral thing. And now, again, the danger is that they make a deal without the actual Palestinian leadership and just build something around the Gaza Strip, which is now in the green zone, which is Israeli occupied with American support, and they will forget about really developing something for the Palestinian civilian population there.
First of all, you have to calm the situation. You cannot heal it now. You need some emergency measures to calm the situation as much as you can. The irony and the terrible thing is that after 2 years, who controls the Gaza Strip now is still the Hamas. Imagine that. Now, Hamas is really evil. And Hamas is not just driven by a desire to liberate the Palestinians. It's driven by an extreme Islamic beliefs of Islamic superiority and other things. You know, it's not just the poor Palestinians who are fighting for the freedom. That's not the case, and what he did on October 7th was part of it. So after 2 years, and sorry for saying it, I knew that will be the outcome of it, because Hamas from the beginning was an ally of Netanyahu, a partner of Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't want the moderate Palestinians, he doesn't want Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, he doesn't like he sees the Palestinian Authority as an enemy, not as an opportunity for something, for peace, and he all along the way preferred Hamas, because with Hamas you cannot reach an agreement. But on the other hand, it's like two groups of mafia, of killers that he thought can live side by side. We'll bribe them with the Qatari money, which is now evident that it bribed also parts, at least, of the Israeli government. And everybody will be happy, and there will be no withdrawal from the territories, and there will be no Palestinian state, and everything is great. And I knew from after the shock of October 7th that Netanyahu will not get rid of Hamas also in Gaza Strip, even after all the atrocities that Hamas made in the October 7th and the following days, because it's his greatest asset in his eyes. And that's the terrible thing. Instead of getting some other more moderate, it will not be a Zionist, or, you know, they will not love us, but you get some more pragmatic force ruling Gaza, you get the same bad old Hamas as governing body of Gaza. And that's terrible.
We could, the only hope we have is to work towards getting rid of the radical leaderships, both in Israel and in Gaza.
I think the only hope we have is to make the conflict an international issue, bringing international forces not just to the Gaza Strip, but also to the West Bank, and making it forcing. Now, it was considered for many years a Israeli leftist fantasy. And people said it will never happen. Now we have a good chance for it to happen. Because of the unique situation with Trump, Netanyahu, et cetera, of forcing a settlement for both sides, for both.
So we're talking about leftist fantasies coming true.
I hope so.